dryness starting to creep into the southeast, is there relief on the way in the short term and the long term? Chris and I will address these issues in the July 31st edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Well, as we typically do, we'll look at the 30-day precipitation departure from normal, and you'll notice a few things on this. A little bit of the red on there in South Georgia, kind of along the Florida Big Bend area. And in central Alabama, we have some red areas where we've seen much below normal precipitation, spotty in other parts of the area in Florida, in North Carolina, parts of around Charlotte and North and South Carolina, and along the coast there where we've seen some above normal precipitation. Otherwise, everything has been kind of spotty as we would expect during a normal summer. How did that affect the stream flows? Well, here's the 28-day average stream flow, and as we've looked at this over the last 3 or 4 months, we started off with green all over the map into May and most of the part of June, but as we got into late June and have gone through July, we've started to see some of those below normal, the browns, the 10 to 24% creep in, and over much of the area. The only area that's probably doesn't have so much is the Central Florida area, which has received some pretty good rainfall during this time. So how's that affected the drought monitor? Well, for the first time in a long time, we actually see a little bit of brown, moderate drought in South Georgia and central Alabama. So there's 2 spots of it, and some of the yellow, which is the abnormally dry, is starting to increase over much of the southeast. We are at 28% of the southeast area is in the abnormally dry. We still only have 0.38% of the moderate drought. So again, if we start to see some more rain, that could change. And really, this is short-term drought, and that's reflected in the Lawn and Garden Moisture Index. This is out of the Alabama Office of the State Climatologist, and the Lawn and Garden Moisture Index measures the capacity of current soil moisture to sustain healthy lawns and gardens. So this is really topsoil. This probably is a good way to estimate short-term drought and so forth, and you can see where those spots of moderate drought are creeping in. That's where we have the red. That's where we're having. And again, this is short-term. This is less long-term. We've had plenty of rain over the last year, so the long-term portion of it probably doesn't have much of an impact, but from a short-term perspective, we need some rain right now.
All right, let's take a look at what we can expect for precipitation over the next several days. We're going to have a trough of low pressure that's going to be developing over the southeast as we go into this weekend. Early on, it means we're going to have precipitation primarily in the Carolinas and into eastern Georgia, but as we go into the weekend and that trough deepens, we're going to see more widespread precipitation across the southeast. With the position of this trough aloft, we're still going to see the heaviest precipitation over the Carolinas and mainly favoring the eastern portion of the area. But as that develops, we're going to see more precipitation further south, and that's going to continue into the early part of next week when we start to see this trough lift to the northeast. High pressure moves in to the south. And from this point onward through the midterm period, basically through Thursday, we're going to see more in the way of daytime precipitation typical for the summer. Looking out through the 7 days from this Friday through Thursday the 7th, we're going to see widespread heavy precipitation between 2 and 4 inches across much of the eastern portion of the area. Then as you get into Alabama and further west, we're going to see less in the way of precip. These areas are going to be primarily either along the trough axis or to the west of that trough axis. These amounts are going to be largely dependent on where that trough axis sets up specifically and how quickly it deepens early in the period. Looking into the long term, we can expect to see above normal precipitation amounts across the northern portion of the area. As you go further south, things should tend to be below normal. This is mainly based on where the models are placing a long waves trough out past next Friday, the 8th. And so it looks like the best chances for precipitation and the extended will be across the northern portion of the area.
Now that we've taken a look at the short and medium term, let's take a look at the long term, and we're going to focus on El Nino, something we've been talking about a lot recently, but there's been some changes in the forecast. So the first thing we'll look at is an historical look at the sea surface temperatures out in the Pacific at the Niño 3.4 region. It's a region of the Pacific Ocean we looked at to decide whether we're in an El Nino. It's a very good indicator. And these show the temperatures. The red show the above normal temperatures out in the Pacific, and the blue shows below normal. And anytime you have, for a 3-month period, above a half a degree, that means you have an El Nino. And then for those that below a half a degree, that means you have a La Nina. And so as we go through, you can see all those periods of El Nino and La Nina. And at the very end here, you can see over the last few years, we've been cooler than normal, but have stayed in neutral conditions. We were very quickly moving into an El Nino, but we flattened out just a little bit. The temperatures have not increased like we were originally expecting. There have been a few things that have changed during this time, and so we flattened out just a little bit, just below where we would be in an El Nino. So it's something where the confidence in a strong El Nino, which we had pretty good in a couple of months ago, we don't quite have that confidence anymore that we're going to have a strong El Nino. And here's part of the reason why. Here's the forecast, and this is the plume. This comes from mid-July, and this comes from CPC. What you can see is that the forecast is showing somewhere in the just above a half a degree. We're increasing, but the spread seemed to all be in this area where each of the different forecasts was showing above a half a degree. So the confidence was pretty high that we would be in an El Nino during this time, and possibly a strong El Nino. Well, because some of the spread of these forecasts are starting to open up a little bit, and some of them actually are creeping down and keeping us out of an El Nino, our confidence is a little bit lower that we're going to have a strong El Nino during this time. Our confidence is still pretty good that we'll have some sort of El Nino, but not that we'll have a strong El Nino during this time. And so based on that information, they've created this bar graph that kind of shows what we can expect. And the green shows our chances for neutral conditions, the red shows our chances for El Nino conditions, and the blue shows our chances for La Nina conditions. And as you can see, we have a very little chance over the whole period of having any La Nina during that time. In our July, August, and September time frame, we have about a 50-50 chance of being in neutral conditions. But as we get into that November, December, and January time frame, when the impacts from an El Nino would be most prominent, we see that we have about a 75% chance of having an El Nino and only a 25% having neutral conditions. But that's even changed from the last couple of forecasts where that El Nino was even higher than that, the chances for El Nino, and the neutral were even lower than that. So that's how it's changing. Now, how will that affect our forecast? Well, the Climate Prediction Center, CPC, will be putting out a new forecast in the middle of the month for this time period, but for right now, their December, January, and February is based on the fact that we looked like we would have a moderate to strong El Nino during that time, and typically with a strong to moderate El Nino in the southeast, we have a better than normal chance above normal rainfall. And then in the Ohio Valley, it's a little bit below, so there's a good gradient between those two. So we'll have to watch when we do our next couple of water resources outlooks how that changed from August to September, and how our forecast is going to change based on what the El Nino is going to do. So the bottom line, in the short term, we have a better chance for thunderstorms for the southeast early in the period through this weekend and into early next week, then more back to pop-up type afternoon storminess in most of the southeast. For Florida, again, wet season is in full swing. We've seen good rain in most of Florida, except maybe for the Big Bend area. But otherwise, wet season is in pretty good swing. For the long term, continued quieter than normal hurricane season, just based on the current conditions and the current forecast. A moderate to strong El Nino is not so certain for the winter. So again, as we watch each successive Water Resources Outlook, we'll be evaluating that and giving you more information as we get a little bit closer. Our next Water Resources Outlook is scheduled to be recorded on August 13th. Thank you for listening to our Water Resources Outlook today. You can find more information at our website at www.weather.gov/SERFC. You can also find us on Facebook at the U.S. National Weather Service, SERFC.gov. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at todd.hamill@noaa.gov.